Hello, I'm Tiny Bloodthirster, and today we're going to look at some of the recent Warhammer 40,000 tournaments and the top lists from these events. 40k tournament analysis is something I've been doing for a few years now. This mostly is on Reddit. I also tried Facebook, Tumblr, Daka, but none of them have really generated the kind of discussions I'm looking for. I've decided that for 9th edition I would like to switch to video format because I think it'll be easier to present this data in a digestible manner. If you hate videos and love pictures, there's also charts for you in the description below. So how does it work? Well, if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering Goldfish, then it's pretty much that, but for 40k. For those who aren't addicted to the cardboard crack, I look at recent GTs and majors, take all lists that were greater than 0.79 win-loss ratios. Basically that just means they had to have a 4-1 or better. And then I break it down to see how many of these lists each unit appeared in to look for a list archetype. I realize we're only 2 weeks into 9th edition, but there has already been at least 4 grand tournaments, and I think there's already some valuable data there. Today we're going to look at some lists from Wizards Asylum GT, Boardroom Brawl, Vanguard Tactics GT, and Adelaide 40k GT. If you'd like to look at the list yourself, the first 3 events are on Best Coast pairings, and Adelaide is on Down Under pairings. Let's start with Adeptus Astartes. There were 4 Space Marines, 1 Blood Angel, and 1 Space Wolf list that had a 4-1 or better record in the 9th edition GTs. That's a whopping 6 lists, more than any other faction. None of these lists were exactly the same, so there's a lot of variance, but there are some similarities across the lists. For example, 4 of them were successor chapters from different supplements, but all 4 of them used Master Artisan. It's such an auto take. If you play successor chapter and aren't taking Master Artisan, then you should do yourself a favor and get those rerolls. In these 6 Astartes lists, 3 of them used captains and cursors and eradicators. This makes sense because captains are support units that double as beat sticks, a lot of utility there, and cursors play the objectives well since you can hide them behind some terrain turn 1 and then run out turn 2 to grab the middle objectives. Eradicators are great at arriving from reserves to destroy something big that doesn't have an invul save. Primaris infantry in general are popular if you look at this chart, and Forge World Dreadnoughts were in a lot of these lists too. For example, Dan Salmons went 5-0 to win the Wizards Asylum GT. It was an Imperial Fist successor with Sororitas allies. The Fist portion of the list was a Tech Marine, Servitors, Contemptors, Eradicators, and a Blade Guard squad. Another list I should mention is Alex Harrison's Salamander successors. They went 5-1 to win the Vanguard Tactics GT. His list featured a Captain, Intercessors, Scouts. 3 Aggressor Bombs made up the bulk of the list. He also had Outriders, Landspeeder Tempest, Graf's Devastator Drop Pod, a Lieutenant, and 3 Eradicators. Personally, I like this list a lot, and I think we are going to continue to see Primaris bodies everywhere, with a splash of Dreadnoughts occasionally. Also, congratulations to both Dan and Alex for their wins. Let's move on to the Custodes. What can I say? Custodes love 9th edition, and 9th edition loves Custodes. They're big, beefy models that are mostly OBSEC, tough to kill. They play the missions really well. There were actually 4 Custodes lists that had a 4-1 record or better in the 9th edition GTs. Unfortunately, I can only find 3 of these lists. Of these 3, all of them used Shield Captains, Custodian Guard troops, and Alaris Terminators. Each list also had an assassin of some kind. If this trend continues, the Custodes archetype in the foreseeable future will likely be several infantry backed up by a few characters or vehicles. Next is Harlequins. I was surprised to see that Harlequins have done so well, especially because their playstyle is very different from Marines or Custodes. They're fast, but they're fragile. They don't hit super hard. However, there were 4 clown lists that had 4-1 or better records in the 9th edition GTs. That's the same amount as Codex Space Marines and Custodes, so good job to those Harlequin players. All 4 of these lists used a Shadow Seer and 3 Skyweavers. They were all taken in either an Outrider detachment or a battalion with a Troop Master and some troops. This is a very powerful core to any Eldar list, because it can deploy behind obscuring a terrain, fly 16 inches over it, advance, gun down a vehicle with Haywire, and then charge a unit that was sitting on an objective, kill that unit, which denies primary victory points in your opponent's next command phase. That's all in a single turn too, by the way. It's fragile though, so it takes some finesse to pull off. In the hands of a good player, it can be very scary. One list I'd like to highlight is Matthew, apologize if I mispronounce this, Matthew Bodnarchuk, who went 5-0 to win the boardroom brawl with Harlequins. His list featured a Shadowseer, 2 Troop Masters, a whopping 5 troops, 3 Skyweavers, a Death Jester, and a Transport. This list is very fragile, but very fast. I assume he had a lot of good terrain to work with, so he could hide his foot troops behind obscuring terrain, so they could set up ambushes at different key moments throughout the games. Either way, good work, Matthew. I love seeing Harlequins on the table. This is a good time to segue into Craft Worlds. There were 2 lists that had Craft Worlds that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. Both of them were a Farseer leading some vehicles and Harlequin allies. Both these lists use custom craft worlds with expert crafters and masters of concealment. If this trend continues, it looks like craft worlds will primarily function as an anvil that Harlequin hammers can crush foes against. Next, let's talk about Chaos Knights. The Chaos Knights had 2 lists that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. Both of them were iconoclast houses with 2 to 3 despoilers and a whole slew of war dogs. It doesn't play the missions well, but it does create a lot of gotcha moments for players who didn't bring enough anti-vehicle weapons. Next, Tau. They had 2 lists that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. They were each different septs. One was Farsight, the other Tau sept, but they were still very similar lists. Behold, a Taunar castle, surrounded by drones, while a cadre Fireblade leads his strike squads to take the objectives. I think that could be a difficult list for a lot of armies to beat, and it doesn't play that differently from the 8th edition Riptide castles we're all familiar with, and I expect a lot of Tau players to pick up the Taunar and plug it into their existing list pretty easily. Now we are done with the armies that scored multiple wins, and we're down to what I call the one-offs, or the B team. Let's start with Grey Knights. They had 1 list that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. It's what I can only describe as Draco Wing, or Terminator spam for those of you who weren't unfortunate enough to be playing in 5th edition. It looks like it plays very similar to the Paladin bombs we saw in 8th edition. You hide squads behind obscuring terrain and use Gate of Infinity to just slingshot your Terminators across the board. Adeptus Mechanicus. The AdMech had what I consider to be about half of a list that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. It was a Mars spearhead that backed up a Custodes patrol. The detachment was called Daedalus, a Datasmith, Dune Crawlers, and a ball of robots. I'm personally a little surprised that there haven't been more AdMech lists at the top tables. I mean, the AdMech are like Marines and Custodes in that they have a lot of durable units that play the primaries well. Then again, it is really early in the edition, and AdMech still have lots of time to catch up. Next is the Adeptus Sororitas. The Sisters of Battle were featured in 1 list that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. It was Dan Salmon's aforementioned Sisters and Imperial Fists that went 5-0 to win the Wizards Asylum GT. I already talked about the Fists, but the Sisters portion of that list was Bloody Rose Battalion, featuring lots of Repentia, some Seraphim, a couple Rhinos. Oh, and there was also a Battle Sanctum. I think it was like the only fortification that appeared in any of these lists. Next, Deathguard and Chaos Demons. I'm going to talk about them at the same time because it was just 1 list. It was a Nurgle list that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. One part of it was Poxmonger, the other was Nurgle Demons. The list had lots and lots of Nurglings and lots of characters as well. He sprinkled in some Spawn, Plaguebush Crawlers, and there was also Termite full of Plague Marines. In my own games of 9th, I've been very impressed with Nurglings, and I would not be too surprised if we saw more hordes of them along the lines of this list in the future. Next is the Drukhari. There was 1 Dark Eldar list that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. It was a mixed Drukhari list featuring both Blackheart and a custom coven. The list featured a lot of racks and transports. Also, 3 Reapers showed up to the party. Orcs. Everybody loves Orcs. They had 1 list that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. Andy Penn went 5-0 to win the Adelaide 40k GT in Australia. He ran what I imagine was a very cool looking Death Skulls army. He spammed lots of buggies and lots of bikes. It's got it all, folks. We have the Warboss and Warbike, Def Killa Wartrike, Megatrax, Scrap Jets, Shock Jump Dragsta, Custom Boosta Blasta, Boom Daka Snazwagon, Warbikers, Bonebreaker, and Burnabama. Bozo the Clown car, and the Farts Explosion Mobile. Guess which ones are real GW kits. Anyway, excellent work, Alex. Everybody loves to see orcs. Next is Tyranids. There was one Tyranid player that went 4-1 or better in the 9th edition GTs. He ran a Tyranid and Genestealer soup that featured lots of Ridge Runners and Acolyte hybrids. He brought some Hive Guards, Zoanthropes, and Exocrines to back up those pants thieves. Now that we've taken a look at the different factions, we're going to take a high-level overview of the codexes. Most of you will be pleased to see that there is a large number of factions represented already. This is pretty impressive considering there have only been 4 GTs so far. Codex Space Marines, Custodes, and Harlequins all tied for more lists that had a 4-1 or better record in the 9th edition GTs. There are also several factions from Imperium, Chaos, and Xenos, with just a few missing overall. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any qualifying lists for the Astra Militarum, Imperial Knights, Chaos Space Marines, Thousand Suns, or Necrons. I guess that means they might be bottom tier this edition, but I still think these armies have some decent tools, and they could show up in some lists at the top tables. We are still early in the edition, and lots of things could change. If I had to guess, I would say Imperial Knights list will probably look similar to the Chaos list above, several Custodes backed up by some Armigers. Chaos Space Marines and Thousand Suns might use lots of Forgel Dreadnoughts, just like the Loyalist Marines are doing right now. You could add a splash of Obliterators or Magnus for flavor. Anyway, I hope this information is all helpful. Again, there are charts and links below, as well as a link to my Patreon if you would like to support the channel. I plan to do some more of these videos every few weeks to help us all become better players together. Until next time, peace out.